I never thought job hunting would drag me into the depths of hell, but there you go. When you're staring at your dwindling bank account, you don't exactly nitpick the odd details in a job ad. So, when I landed a gig at an academy that paid generously for minimal qualifications, I ignored the weirdly vague job description and the remote location. I mean, living expenses included seemed like a steal. The drive up to Soma Academy was less scenic and more foreboding with each mile. Nestled in the shadow of skeletal mountains, the building looked more like a refurbished fortress than any school I'd seen. The gray stone walls were imposing under the overcast sky, the kind of look that said "keep out" more convincingly than any sign could. When I reached the towering wrought iron gates, they creaked open as if on cue, yet no one was in sight to welcome or direct me. The entrance hall was solemnly magnificent, all polished marble and looming portraits of people who clearly never learned to smile. I was met by Mr. Thalen, the headmaster, a tall, rail-thin man with sharp features that made him look like he'd been carved out of spare wood. "Ah, the new administrative assistant," he declared more than greeted, his voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. "Welcome to Soma Academy. You'll find your stay enlightening." We walked down a series of corridors, the air growing colder with each turn. The whole place smelled faintly of lavender and something metallic I couldn't quite place. Occasionally, we passed doorways leading to dimly lit classrooms where the shadows seemed to flicker too much for the lack of wind. There was a peculiar, rhythmic tapping coming from one room, though a quick glance inside revealed nothing but empty chairs. Thalen handed me a small set of keys and a sheet of paper before parting ways rather abruptly. The paper was titled simply "Employee Guidelines." I expected the usual spiel about punctuality and dress codes, but what I read made a cold patch of dread spread across my back. 1. Do not venture onto the 3rd floor after sundown. 2. Never enter the library without a staff member present. Books must not leave the room under any circumstances. 3. If you hear music from an unidentifiable source, close your eyes and count to 20. Do not investigate the sound. 4. Avoid the East Wing's 2nd floor bathroom between 12:00 and 12:30 p.m. 5. All windows should be closed and secured by 6 p.m. Do not open them, regardless of how fresh the air outside may seem. 6. Never address the statue in the main hall, no matter what you see or hear. 7. Dismiss any handwritten notes or messages as fabrications of your mind. They are not meant for you. 8. Do not use the phone in the admin office unless it rings. Answer swiftly and do not engage beyond necessary information. Talk about job perks, right? If this was their idea of a joke, it wasn't funny. Just bizarre and chilling, and the rules made my new workplace feel more like a haunted house. As I folded the paper, noticing a faint stain that looked suspiciously like an old blood mark, I decided maybe Thalen's version of asterisk and lightning and mine were galaxies apart. Settling into my tiny office, the room felt stuffy, so naturally I tried to open a window. It wouldn't budge. Remembering Rule 5, I stopped, cursing under my breath. At around 11:58 a.m., curious and a bit defiant, I headed towards the East Wing's 2nd floor bathroom. A rattling sound grew as I approached, like someone shaking chains softly. Cold sweat formed on my brow, but my feet moved of their own accord. As I reached for the door handle, a piercing shriek echoed down the hallway from behind me. I spun around to see nothing but the flickering light from an overhead bulb. Heart slamming against my ribs, I decided maybe some rules were meant to be followed. I retreated, the shriek still ringing in my ears, vowing never to test another rule again. But curiosity, as they say, can be a wicked thing. Sometimes you really should leave the doors unopened, the shadows unchecked. Because some things, once awakened, don't go back to sleep so easily. And now, there's a figure at the end of the hallway watching me, not moving, just watching. The figure at the end of the hallway remained still, its outline barely discernible under the stuttering light. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to throw open the door and disappear into the night, yet my feet refused to obey. The flicker of light cast grotesque shadows, making the figure seem to twitch in a spectral dance. I squinted, trying to discern facial features or clothes that might mark it human. Nothing. It was just a dark blot, a smudge against the dim, wallpapered corridor. My breath hitched as I took a hesitant step backward, my hand abandoning the safety of the door handle. My retreat seemed to encourage it. As if my movement was the permission it was waiting for, the figure glided forward, soundlessly, impeccably smooth, as though it weren't stepping but floating. I froze, terror rooting me to the spot as much as curiosity pinned my gaze on this impossibility. It stopped a few paces away, close enough now that I could discern the faintest silhouette of a human shape, but no more. The details were swallowed by the darkness. Was that a hand creeping forward, or just the play of light and shadow? My mind raced, imagining a skeleton thin arm extending towards me. A floorboard creaked sharply, as though protesting the weight of an unseen force. The sound snapped me back into motion. I turned swiftly, my hand slamming against the door, pushing it open with a force I didn't know I possessed. The cool night air hit my face, but I hesitated on the threshold, compelled by an inexplicable pull to look back. The light flickered one last time before dying completely, leaving only the moonlight spilling in through the window at the corridor's end. It cast the hallway into an eerie silver glow, and there it was. Not just a shape, but a face, devoid of features, as smooth and unmarked as a blank canvas. My stomach churned at the sight, bile rising in my throat. I stepped out, the door slamming shut behind me with a definitive thud that silenced the haunting vision. But the image was seared into my mind, unseeing eyes that I could feel on me, watching, waiting. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in sync with my steps as I headed towards the street. The night seemed unusually silent, the typical hum of life strangely absent, as if the world was holding its breath. My own came in jagged gasps. I should call someone, the police, a friend, anyone. But as I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar, rough against the velvet lining. I pulled it out. It was a key, old and ornate, the kind you might see in a haunted house movie. Where did it come from? Did I pick it up unknowingly, or had it been placed there? My mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. That thing, whatever it was, did it want me to return? Was this key an invitation or a warning? Panic surged anew, spurring me into a run. I needed light, people, noise, anything to drown out the silence and the throbbing fear of imminent darkness. As I neared the main street, a dimly lit pub at the corner drew me like a moth to a flame. I burst through the door, the sound of casual chatter and laughter washing over me in a comforting wave. I stumbled to the counter, clutching the key tightly in my fist until it left an impression. "Everything okay?" the bartender asked, eyebrows knitting together in concern. I opened my mouth to answer, to ask for help, to admit that no, nothing was okay, that none of this was okay. But before the words could form, a chilling wisp of air brushed against my neck, like a sigh in the dark. I whipped around, half expecting to see the hallway specter framed in the doorway. But there was only the night, cool and mocking in its normalcy. Turning back to the bartender, I forced a smile, shrugged, and asked for a drink, my voice steadier than I felt. But as I sat there, surrounded by the living, the laughter around me seemed hollow, a fragile bubble that could pop at any moment. I fingered the key in my pocket, the metal cold and heavy against my skin. It was a reminder, a call. And somewhere in a dark hallway, something waited, patient and silent, just watching. I felt my spine turn to ice. My breath ragged in the silence that stretched like a tightrope from the living room to the dark hallway in front of me. The house was old, its bones settled deep in the soil, creaking with the moan of untold secrets. Every wooden board beneath my feet whimpered, disapproving of every step I dared to take, warning me, perhaps pleading with me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not after that whispering call that seemed to breathe from the walls themselves, not just my imagination. It was different tonight. There was intent behind it, a purpose that I felt aiming its invisible eyes directly at me. Edging closer to the mouth of the hall, I tried switching on the lights, fingers fumbling for the familiar switch. A click. Nothing. A surge of frustration mixed with fear tickled my fingers as they found only the cold, unyielding plastic, useless in its silence. Pressing on, my hand grazed the wall, seeking the comfort of contact. The wallpaper, faded from years of avoidance and neglect, felt strangely thicker, almost like it held itself braced for what lay behind it. My palm felt every pulse of the house, as if it was breathing slowly, deeply, gathering itself. The darkness before me didn't just absorb light. It seemed to absorb sound, time, the very air I tried to breathe. Mounting a feeble defense, I pulled out the little flashlight I kept dangling from my keychain. A tiny sentinel in what was beginning to feel like a descent into some hungry, yawning mouth. The beam of light was a wee, trembling thing, but it cut through the darkness in slivers that painted distorted shadows on the walls. With each slow step, the air grew colder, clawing through my clothes, settling on my skin with invisible weight. I paused, listening. The house held its breath with me. A floorboard creaked somewhere to my left, a mournful echo in the oppressive silence. My heart took up a staccato rhythm, and I could almost swear I heard another, quieter heartbeat syncing with mine. Or was it a delayed echo against the hollow wood of the house? Hello, my voice was a stranger here, a thin, broken sound that seemed foolish now, swallowed by the dark. I regretted it instantly, a bubble of panic rising to my throat. There was a shift, almost imperceptible, like a whisper of silk against skin. Shadows at the edge of my light seemed to jitter, to hesitate, and then settle. I was convinced something was watching, listening, matching my movements with a deliberate, patient mimicry. I thought of turning back, leaving this madness to the house and its hidden watcher. But there was that draw, that inexplicable pull that tugged like a hook at the edges of my mind, urging me deeper. As I reached what I knew to be the old study, the door was ajar, which was wrong, so very wrong. I always kept it closed, locked even after. A picture flashed in my mind. The last time I had entered, months ago, to retrieve a forgotten document, and the feeling of being watched had been so overwhelming, so tangible, I had vowed never to enter again. But now here I was, staring into the black gap of the door, my own breath loud and ragged in my ears. Steeling myself, I pushed the door wider, the light from my tiny flashlight slicing into the room. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages open like mouths frozen mid-scream. The air was thick, stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in ages. And there, in the far corner, was the old rocking chair, moving ever so slightly on its own. My heart skipped, lodged in my throat as the wooden floor behind me uttered a solitary, decisive creak, louder than all before it, as if something had stepped or had been released. I turned around slowly, the flashlight's trembling beam the only barrier between me and whatever horrors awaited in the suffocating dark of the hallway. As the beam of my flashlight quivered along the hall's course, the shadows seemed almost liquid, shifting with an unnerving fluidity that suggested something present, something waiting just beyond the frail circle of light. My breath hung heavy in the chilled air, each exhale a fog that mingled with the omnipresent dust motes, creating a tenuous mist that seemed to thicken with my dread. I edged forward, the floorboards protesting underfoot, a whispered betrayal to whatever lay ahead. The air grew increasingly frigid as I moved, wrapping around me like cold fingers prying into my coat, chilling my skin beneath. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, each beat a drumroll to some sinister revelation. Just then, from the room to my left, the one Aunt Marissa had always kept locked, a sharp creak sounded. It was nothing much, perhaps merely the house settling, yet in the tense silence of the old house, it was a gunshot. I stopped mid-step, my hand shaky as I aimed the flashlight toward the door. It was partly ajar now, which I couldn't remember ever seeing before. The edge of darkness that loomed beyond the narrow opening beckoned. With reluctant steps, I approached the room, each footfall a deliberate act of will. My hand reached out, hesitated, then pushed the door open with a resigned force. The hinges moaned in protest. Inside, the room was shrouded in layers of the past, draped with old, heavy fabrics that smelled of mothballs and decay. I advanced inside, the light from my flashlight slicing through the gloom. My gaze fell on old photographs on the walls, their frames cocooned in cobwebs, eyes in the photos piercing the darkness with a haunting intensity. As I passed one, I could swear I saw a figure reflected in the glass, not behind me in the room, but somehow inside the picture itself, shifting subtly as though turning to keep its gaze fixed on me. A chill traced the length of my spine, but I pressed on, driven by a need to know to see. My foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending me sprawling forward with a gasp. The flashlight clattered out of my grasp, rolling under an old wooden trunk. Plunged into near total darkness, my hands scrambled on the dusty floor, searching desperately for the flashlight. My fingers found it, gripping it with a nearly frenzied relief, but as I flicked it back on, the light swept across the room and paused on the trunk where it had fallen. The trunk wasn't latched. Breathing laboriously, I edged over to it, heart pounding with a mix of fear and an inexplicable compulsion. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside, there were letters, piles of them, yellowed with age and bound with ribbo. An S now brittle and faded. Atop them lay a small, cloth doll, its face worn away with time, but its eyes, those small black beads, seemed to stare right into mine. Gulping back the uneasy feeling that bubbled in my throat, I picked up the doll. It felt unnaturally cold, and the moment it touched my skin, the air around me seemed to pulse, the walls of the room drawing in as if breathing. A soft noise caught my attention, a whispering that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. No words, just a susurrus sound like wind through dead leaves. I strained to listen, and as I did, the room grew colder, the shadows deeper. I felt her then, Aunt Marissa, or at least the imprint of her distress, lingering like a stain in the fabric of the room. My mind raced, piecing together old, half-forgotten conversations, her warnings, her forbiddances, her fearful glances towards this very room. Shaking, questioning my sanity, but unable to stop, I began to untie the ribbons around the letters. As the first one unfolded, the whispered noises increased, a crescendo that seemed to seep out of the very air. The first letter began innocently enough, speaking of days past, but as my eye caught the last line, a cold dread settled in my stomach. It read, "Do not open the trunk." The silence slammed back down like a verdict. I realized too late my grave mistake, my violation of a boundary left by the one who knew. The doll in my hand suddenly felt heavier, its eye beads sharp with accusation. The room seemed to pulse quicker, the shadows elongating, reaching. I dropped the doll as if it burned, and stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, my mind a whirl of panic. The cry that escaped my lips was half sob, half scream, an invocation of the dark itself that now felt alive around me.